I'm Heather, and welcome back to 180 Days of Lang, the series where I take you day by day through the lesson plans that I use in my AP English Language and Composition class. So we are in really the heart, the soul of the rhetorical analysis unit, which is my unit 2. This is when we're going to do a deep dive into some iconic, as the kids say, speeches in American history. And I chose these texts particularly because I think they're really thematically linked. I know a lot of people like to do thematic units. I do within units thematic topics with a few texts connected to them. And then when we get into synthesis, then I have whole thematic units. But for rhetorical analysis, I wanted to just keep focus on a few texts that we could just bring into conversation with one another organically when we're discussing them. And because we want to get those seminal U.S. documents, is what the Common Core standards call them, we want to get as many of those really important U.S. history documents in there. Speeches that come from different civil rights movements or periods of time when Americans have been trying to advance rights for a minority group are really powerful sources because, one, they're inspiring. Two, students usually have enough historical context about those times to understand them. And then three, I think a lot of the rhetorical analysis passages they'll encounter in the AP Lang exam draw from that of historical speeches too. So I think because we have an opportunity to talk about what they have in common, I like to do this little preview slideshow with my students to introduce the 3 speeches we'll be doing. And in fact, as I'm planning this for my own class this year, I'm thinking about swapping out some titles in here, but these I've used before with success. And I just want to show you how I introduce this thematic unit. So I just have students pay attention while I pull up this unit introduction. I call it All Men Are Created Equal, the Rhetoric of Freedom. And I have them literally copy down this very important quote from an American document down into their notebook. I want them to write the words and hear them in their head, see them on their paper. Unalienable rights, self-evident truths, those things. And then I give them a little trivia quiz. Now, depending on the makeup of your class, usually most students have already covered this by the time we get to it because if they're juniors, they're often already in U.S. history, or if they're seniors, they've already had it. Hopefully they can answer all of these. So what famous document is the quote from? Who is credited with writing it? And what year was it written? And which holiday celebrates its publication? So we talk it out and then share out the answers. It's the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson is credited with that part of it. 1776 is when it was written, and we celebrate its publication on Independence Day or the 4th of July. And then I ask them to dig deeper into some of the words in that. And this is really interpretive. And of course, depending on your context, I'm assuming you are teaching in the United States because the majority of AP Lang teachers do. If not, you might need to adapt this entirely to something in your own country. But assuming you're in the US, these are the questions that we tackle all the time culturally. Who is the we? That's just a question I ask forever when we're reading anything analytically. Who is the we? Who are the them in a speech? And then who did all men refer to? And I think it's important for students to know from history that at the time of writing, all men, the full rights of citizenship only belonged to white male property owners over the age of 21, I believe. So that was actually a pretty small group compared to expanded voting rights that we have today. And then getting them to think about what might inalienable mean. It's not a word they're probably super familiar with, but getting their interpretation. And then just getting their thoughts on life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. What is that? So that's just a way to open up the discussion. I have a very informal conversation with them about that. If you have reluctant speakers, this sort of thing is best done in pairing up or in small groups, and then maybe getting some summary things on the board, because sometimes students don't even want to share their thoughts on something as general as this. So then I have them talk out milestones that we have faced or that we have achieved as a nation in living up to that ideal. So truly all men or all people, how have we made progress towards that ideal, which is the perfect version of society envisioned. So 1776, the time of America's founding, the revolution, to today. And students will often come up with things like, okay, removing the property ownership requirement for voting, abolition of slavery, the 14th Amendment to expand citizenship, the 15th Amendment to expand voting rights. Sorry, I have a list on this document so I can remember so many of them. Women's suffrage, we've talked about Brown versus Board of Education in Unit 1, that one. The Civil Rights Movement, the Voting Act, Obergefell v. Hodges, which legalized gay marriage. So those are some things that students might come up with, or they might have other ideas for their own specific knowledge of history for that. So have that conversation and just point out that this was not a one and done deal in 1776. It was like, boom, everyone's equal, welcome to America. It is an evolving process in progress. And then depending on your teaching context, you might have the conversation about some of those things rolling back a little bit, or discussions about some of those things rolling back, and maybe you don't have that conversation, but this is the real world, and this is AP Lang, and we try to talk about real world things, right? So one thing I do want to share with them are just a picture of the three people that we are reading speeches from in the unit. So I have Frederick Douglass's What to the Slave is the 4th of July, which we're going to start today in this lesson. Then we have a speech from the women's suffrage movement by Carrie Chapman Catt, and then we have Harvey Milk's Hope speech from the 1970s. So these are just three speeches of many voices we could include, and of course you can swap these out and include texts that you love or that you think would resonate with your students, but these are the three. So if you do update this, maybe swap out some pictures for them to see as well. One thing I just want to show you on the slideshow, at the end of the unit, there are some reflection questions, and I think if you have time, it's good to come back to these and just get them to talk about those essential questions as well. So the next thing I'm going to do in this lesson is pass out the next of our analyzing text documents. Students may or may not have read parts of this speech already. It's so powerful. This is just excerpts from it because the full speech is very long. So for our rhetorical analysis purposes, I really just focused on, I think I just pulled like 5 paragraphs from it. This is the What to the Slave is the 4th of July speech. So there's a lot of information in the background to help them establish the rhetorical situation. But in particular, there's some really great explorations of tone, imagery, diction, those things, and also just the exigence. He's giving the speech on the 4th of July. That matters to the occasion. So this is a great build right after the tone lesson, and then in the first thing we read after we finish our rhetorical situation unit. So I'm going to ask students to tackle this one independently because they've already done 2 annotations in this style before. And then I'm going to remind them that their annotations are due at the start of class tomorrow for discussion. And then no matter what amount of time I have left, I let them get to work on this. So if you have a block schedule, they may have lots of time. If you have a shorter schedule, they may have more homework. But that is where I end class. I would also say if you've got some good deep thinkers that are willing to talk in your discussions, start adding a requirement that they write 2 discussion questions on the back of the document. They need to come to class with things to ask about the text beyond the questions that are already on there. And usually that's a good way just to start conversation with their questions before you start diving into the annotations. All right, I'm going to end the lesson here today, and I have more to say on politically difficult texts and conversations in this class. I'm going to save that for a few lessons for now, so if that's something that's like on your heart too, make sure you catch that video. So if you are not yet subscribed, this reminds me, if you're not yet subscribed to these videos, please do, because I'm still rolling through them, and that way you won't miss them when they come out. If you're teaching along with me this year with these, by the way, I am so curious if anybody is like doing these lessons and watching these videos a little bit ahead of time or in real time as they're doing the lessons. So you don't have to leave a comment. If you're too shy to do that, you can always email me at heather@englishdepartmentresources.com. But I would love to know really any feedback you have on these videos, because I don't know, I think they're helping people. Some of the background stuff that I'm seeing happening, I think people are connecting with them, but I want to make them better for you. So let me know your feedback and have a great rest of your day.